Hello, everyone. Today's Network Collective Short Take is going to be a little bit different than what you're used to. One of the recurring themes in our listener survey is that you wanted to get to know our guests better. You hear the great insights, but don't know much about their backgrounds or how they obtain the knowledge that they share with you in our episodes. So from time to time, we're going to start doing what we're calling community spotlights to highlight contributors and industry professionals who are doing good work, so you can get a broader understanding of who they are and maybe even find some inspiration for your own career journey as well. If you're watching the video, you can see that kicking off this series with me is Nick Russo. Nick has been a Network Collective collaborator for some time now and has been a contributor to some of our most popular episodes. So right after the break, you're going to hear about how Nick got his start and has accomplished so much within a relatively compact portion of his career. So Nick, thanks for coming on to chat with me today and for being the brave soul to get this new idea off the ground.
Yeah.
Why don't we start at the beginning, man? How'd you get into this thing, this computer networking to begin with?
Yeah. So I guess I'll go back to maybe 18 years old. So right after high school, that's probably a good place to start. I think before that, I tinkered around with stuff in high school. I think a lot of us did just out of interest, but that's not really too fun to talk about. But so my first few years out of high school were probably different than most people. So when I graduated high school, I did two things. So I applied to a college. I went to Rochester Institute of Technology and studied computer science there, earned my 4-year degree, graduated in 2008. But at the same time, when I finished high school in 2004, I also joined the U.S. Marine Corps as an infantryman in the reserves. So shooting rockets at tanks and blowing doors down with C4 had nothing to do with networking, but that's what I did. That was my job for a few years as a reservist. And while I was in college, I was studying computer science, didn't really do a lot of IT networking stuff. It was kind of, I knew it was there, but I was doing coding and that was cool to me at the time. When I finished college, I got commissioned in the Marine Corps as a communications officer, and then that became my profession. And I was fortunate because in the bust economy of 2008, when all my peers were trying to find work and having a hard time in a contracting economy, I didn't have that problem. So I went off in the Marine Corps as a comm officer, and in 2009 is when I started my communications specific training. And this was an interesting time because we covered everything from using tactical radios, using PBX, like kind of legacy telephony, then voice over IP, data networks, all that kind of stuff was part of it. And in school, I was like, okay, this Cisco stuff, it's kind of cool. Didn't really love it at the time. Shortly thereafter, my first deployment, I went to Haiti. And some of you might remember about 10 years ago, it was in early 2010, there was a massive earthquake that just shattered the country. And my unit got deployed on short notice. So I deployed down there with my battalion, and I was the communications officer in that unit. And I was responsible for all the communications in a real deployment now. So it was a little bit different than training. Because it was such an expeditionary deployment and there wasn't a lot of fixed infrastructure, the earthquake destroyed most of the country. So electricity was a luxury. So a lot of what we had was just tactical radios and kind of small SATCOM flyaway kits, not the kind of heavy networking that we're used to. More like you can imagine like a branch site with a SATCOM link back kind of stuff. So nothing too exciting. Again, on that deployment, it was very focused on tactical radio stuff. And I let the network nerds on my team go and do their thing, because I just didn't know it. My second deployment to Afghanistan in 2011 was really where my eyes got open, because it was a much more static position. This base had been there for at least a few years. And when we rolled in, the infrastructure was mostly set up. It was my job to install, operate, and maintain it, expand it to some new sites and things like that. Was a combination of SATCOM links and line-of-sight radio shots and a lot of Cisco networking equipment. We had servers in a small data center that we put VMware on. So it was kind of the general IT infrastructure you'd see in a typical SMB, except deployed overseas. And, obviously very resource starved in terms of getting replacement parts, et cetera. So while I was there, I worked with my comm chief. His name was John Robertson. He's a great friend of mine, and he just retired after 30 years in the Marine Corps, like a couple months ago. So pretty incredible commitment there. Anyway, I saw his skills, and at the time, I was a completely untrained. I was an officer. My job was to lead and provide oversight, not necessarily type on keyboards at the time. I saw his skills, and even though his skills were probably CCNA level, I was like blown away. Like a CCNA was like God mode in the Marines at the time. So, he was setting up routers, plugging things in, doing VLANs. I was like, oh, I got to learn this, and on the deployment, I learned a little bit, which was cool. But at that point, I was like, this is what I want to do. And I left the Marine Corps in 2012. Got a job in the commercial sector doing networking stuff. And that was really the start of where the networking career began in early 2012, I'd say.
I find that interesting that the thing that inspired you, and it's funny because I kind of had the same reaction when I saw it for the first time as well. It's a lot of the stuff that we kind of just go, today, right? Like it's the stuff that's not all that interesting anymore. But man, at the time it was like, this is different and this looks important. And I know it's important. And it was really, it's like, man, I want to get in on that. So it's really funny because I had that same reaction the first time I saw someone doing networking. I'm like, ooh, that looks like where I want to be. And I have no idea why. Like I couldn't pinpoint like why I chose that over server administration or whatever at the time. Obviously, as I grew in my career, it became a more conscious choice. But that's it's really interesting to hear you say that.
Yeah. And once I got out of the Marine Corps and I got hired for my job, I think in like December 2011, and I started in January, I spent that whole, Christmas break period just studying. I bought like a CCNA book. I was reading it. I was doing labs. I was like, oh, I couldn't get enough. I loved it. Then I went on, like I think a lot of new in career people tend to do this. And I think it's not necessarily a bad thing, but I went on like a 2-year certification binge. I don't even know how many I earned, but a couple Cisco ones, like an IDLE one, probably a Juniper one. I don't even know, but I earned a bunch. I learned a lot doing it, and it was useful because in the job I was currently working, we had a lot of people who were brilliant electrical engineers, people who did radios and RF stuff. I worked in a radio manufacturer. We didn't have quite as strong of a network presence, so I became known in that field there, which was kind of niche for that particular environment. So I enjoyed that. Again, we're talking 2012, 2013 timeframe here. And at that point, I was probably like a mid-level engineer. Generally enjoyed the work I did. And, it was right around that point that I realized, I went from not knowing anything 2 years ago to being pretty good after just a few years. And I said, if I can keep up this pace, which, I wasn't sure that I could at the time, but if I can keep up this pace for maybe 3, 4, 5 more years, I could probably become, not only well-known in the community, but I could also become a top contributor wherever I work. And, now we're kind of here today, and I feel like I've met that goal, not trying to sound cocky here, but
it's not at all
I've kept
cocky.
up that.
You are a top contributor. There's no question about it.
Yeah,
I'll say it for you. There's no qualms about that.
I appreciate that. I've tried to keep up that pace the whole time and, constantly learning new things. The thing that all of us want to do. And, I know we'll talk about trends here shortly, but that's one of the things I think is really important is when we take a mindset of when we contribute back to the community and we become top performers and we share that knowledge and we mentor others and we make that part of our daily, battle rhythm, to use a military term, it's the old phrase, a rising tide will lift all boats. And I believe that. If you're adding content to the pool and it's useful, original, and productive, then you're really just elevating the entire practice. And some people have asked me, I've used that phrase before, elevate the state of our practice. And some people are like, well, that's really vague. And what does that even mean? And they accuse me of management speak, but no, it's not really that. It's, if you're improving the community, which I think you and I are doing on this very call, and other people, thousands of people around the world are doing it through their training, through their blogs, through their mentorship, through their conference talks, and all kinds of other things that people are doing out there to bring value. I think overall that we're doing a great thing for the community.
That's awesome. You've been focusing a lot on automation lately. So I want to talk a bit about that because you kind of just dove in there. I mean, and so this has kind of been since you've come on the show where you started really focusing on the idea of automation and programmability. And so I'd just like to just briefly talk about what that transition was like for you, because I think a lot of people are either in the middle of that or looking at that right now. And so I think it'd be interesting to hear your take on it.
Yeah, it was it was kind of a hard transition for me because, in late 2016, I earned my CCDE. That was the last major cert I got. I was kind of done after that. So I earned it in November. I think I took the month of December off, just kind of hung out. And then in January, I said,
time off. I've never heard of you taking.
It was weird. It was really strange, but I did. And then in January, I came back and I said, I want to learn something new, but I don't want to just like start another CCIE. I don't want to, learn another networking vendor CLI. So what I decided to do was actually not programmability at all. I decided to do two things, and it ultimately led me to programmability later. The first thing I did was like a $10 MBA course on Udemy. And I was like, $10, why can't go wrong? And it was actually really good. And it helped me round out just basic business knowledge around everything from marketing, accounting, production, operations, those kind of organizational behavior, strategy, those kinds of basic things. That was useful for me to have. And then I said, okay, I've got a little more context around business stuff. This is going to set me up to do, maybe if I want to be an independent consultant or whatever, it gives me a little more knowledge outside of technology. Then a month later, in February, I said, I want to learn a little bit about cloud because I know absolutely nothing about it. Again, another $10 investment on Udemy, got an AWS course, which was probably the best $10 I ever spent. Learned just the basics of, EC2 and S3 and just played around with it and got exposed to it. So now at this point, I'm in completely uncharted waters doing cloud. I didn't even have a use case. My job wasn't doing it. I was just messing around. And then a few months later, we'll talk about this maybe in a future about some of the history on some of these networks that I helped build. But at this point, we had already started building kind of a large global MPLS network, and we were getting to the point where there were a lot of repetitive tasks. And I was like, I've heard of this thing called Ansible. I don't know anything about it. I'm not good with automation, but you might remember I did go to school for computer science, and my coding skills are rusty. I haven't done it professionally in more than a decade, but I was like, I remember enough to where I think I could survive here. So again, I did my pip install Ansible in April of 2017, and I've been chugging away at it since then. My initial use case for Ansible was a little bit different because for the MBA stuff and the cloud stuff, I was just tinkering. But Ansible, I had a use case at work, and that's what I think fueled me to go really hard down that road instead of really hard on the cloud road or whatever, because I had a real use case at work, and I had real demonstrable results if I were able to do it successfully. So that kind of got me started. And that was about 2.5 years ago now. And then since then, I've explored, not just Ansible, but other tools, just my own Python scripts and Nornir and Napalm. And there's a million other things out there that are awesome. But I really got into that because I thought that a lot of this really isn't that hard. And I'm really just saving myself time. I started off by just doing really basic stuff like most people recommend. And it was massively beneficial. So then I just kind of built it and had to do more and more complex things. One example is really, logically it's easy to think about, but imagine you run an MPLS network and you've got 20 POPs and management wants a matrix, 20 by 20 matrix, so 400 cells, and they want all the POP to POP round trip times. So from site A to site B, it's 10 milliseconds, right? You get the point. Mm-hmm. So I used to, when we only had 6 sites, I would just do it manually because it took me 10 minutes and I was like, okay, cool. I'll just log in. I'll do some show commands while I'm here, make sure everything's working. But that really quickly gets out of control when you've got like 10, even 10 sites is 100 cells to fill, minus the diagonal, right? So it was a ton. So again, using Ansible, was able just to log in, run some IP SLAs or whatever I did. I don't even remember now. Populate this big chart, and then out comes this spreadsheet that was massive, and I could generate it in like a minute or 5 minutes or however long it took to run. And that's when I really started to see the value of how I could make this work in a real production network, doing more than just grabbing configs, but doing things that our existing network operations products couldn't do. And I thought that was pretty useful, and I continued to build use cases based on what my specific customer needed. And I just kind of fell in love with that. The other thing that I really liked, even past just the automation piece, was the the kind of DevOps workflows. And when we talk about all the things that fit into that, from continuous integration and continuous deployment to version control and the whole concept of infrastructure as code and model-driven programmability, and when all that stuff fits together, you end up with a really incredible solution for network management. And that was like, I loved it. I was like, I got to do this. And I've been doing that for 2 years, and it's just been amazing.
Awesome. One of the other things, and this is, I think, a bit more recent, you've been creating a lot of content. So obviously you've done quite a few episodes with us. And like I said at the top of the show, some of them are more popular ones on protocol deep dives. But I've started to see you're starting to do content at places like Pluralsight, and you're doing, I think, some stuff with Pearson. I'm throwing it out there. I think that's in there. Yeah. And so, tell me a bit about that. Like, how'd you get into doing that? Like, is that something that you're going to be focusing on going forward? Like, how does that work for you?
Yeah. So this kind of goes back into I want to add content to the pool. I want to lift all boats. I want to share my knowledge out there. Of course, the difference here is that I can get paid doing it, because at the end of the day, we all need to get paid, right? I don't think there's necessarily a bad thing there, but yeah. No. So I got interested in it because I felt like the knowledge that I had gained, and people who are watching this and who know me, a lot of people are going to say, man, that Nick Russo guy, he's not even that good. And you're probably right, because there are so many other people who are really, really good with the network programmability stuff, because they do it like it's their profession. Like for me, I don't really do it as part of my day job because I don't need to anymore. It's just not relevant for the work I do. So I do it on the side, but there are people who are absolutely incredible at it and know it very, very well. However, I think my unique value is the specific business context in which I did it. And I actually gave a talk at Interop a few months ago and put that up on YouTube to talk about how I introduced automation in a bureaucracy or a very bureaucratic environment, and the steps I took and how I did a business analysis there. That's just one example of the specific value that I know how to bring. So I wanted to share some of that in a commercial setting through Pluralsight and O'Reilly and things like that as well, because I think that I'm not just teaching the abstract skills, I'm painting scenarios around it that fit real life use cases. And I think that helps people learn better. And that's just my style. And I wanted to share that with other people. So that was probably the most appropriate avenue. I feel like people are getting a really good return on investment for being able to learn content from professionals who have experience, and I get some equitable compensation. So I'm happy, they're happy. Seems to work out pretty well. Recently what I've been doing with Pluralsight is some training around some of the Cisco DevNet stuff. So it's not official cert training. It just focuses more on skills. So how can we use Python to interact with Cisco APIs? How can we build a DevOps, a CI/CD pipeline? What are the different API types? How does Docker work, and how can that be part of the solution? What about web security? How about netconf and restconf and yang, those kinds of things, and trying to wrap those into a coherent set of courses that can help network engineers who already have networking skills to elevate their skills to the next level so that they can kind of operate in a program, in a world where automation and programmability become the norm and not the exception.
Gotcha. So I guess we probably already teed this off a little bit, but I kind of want to get your opinion, and I think we'll probably close with these next couple of questions. But really, I kind of want to get your idea of, what are some trends that are happening right now that you think are positive, things people should be paying attention to? And you've kind of mentioned a couple of things here. I think you're probably going to repeat yourself, and that's okay. Maybe not. Maybe you come up with something new. But I think it's one of those important things that all of us kind of have these different perspectives. So what is the things that you think people should be paying attention to right now?
Yeah. So from a human perspective, kind of what I was just saying a minute ago is I'm seeing more and more people sharing their experiences and their knowledge. And of course, this is a double-edged sword, because sometimes people will share things that are just technically wrong. And I think that's okay. And I've even done that, and I've been corrected in public, and you just have to be tough enough to take it and accept the criticism and make the changes. And I think that's fine. But, compared to 10 or even 5 years ago, we have, the Network Collective is new, other bigger organizations like packet pushers, and even smaller ones like individual bloggers and content producers. I think we're seeing a greater diversity of people with diverse skill sets and backgrounds contributing content. And I think that's important. And the other thing is, it doesn't just have to be technical deep dive stuff. It can be anything. It can be your individual experiences in networking, or how to combat fatigue, or how to beat the imposter syndrome, or whatever it is you think is important. And whatever knowledge you have, I always encourage people to share that. Whether you do it through a commercial avenue like paid training, or whether you make a YouTube video or a blog, it doesn't really matter. So long as you're adding content and helping the community grow, I think you're doing a great thing. And that's a trend I want to see continue.
Awesome. I think it's fair then to ask about the inverse. Is there anything that you see that you think, there be dragons. Caution there. Don't necessarily believe what you hear. Are there trends happening in the industry that you're concerned about?
Yeah. And this kind of ties in. I mentioned the imposter syndrome a minute ago. I think I'm seeing, and again, this might just be me because I have kind of a filter in my mind that looks for it. But I feel like a lot more people are talking about imposter syndrome on social media and in chats. And, I understand it. I understand what the syndrome is. And I admit to having felt it before in the past. But I pretty quickly realized that when you compare yourself to other people, especially if you're doing it from a position of weakness or inferiority, then you're really just hurting yourself. Because, let me give you an example. I can't compare myself to other people because we have different experiences, different histories, different stories, different skill sets. And unless you're comparing people against a very strict specification, for example, a job requisition that says, hey, do I want to hire Nick or do I want to hire Jordan for this job? Here are the specs. Which candidate fits this mold better? Pick that person. That's a fair comparison because there's a model that tells you how to compare people. But at a general level, when you go on Twitter and you see person X posting blogs and videos and he or she's doing all this and you're not, and you feel like you're just, that person's just winning and you're losing, that's just the wrong attitude to take. And I always encourage people, don't compare yourself to others. Compare yourself against your own success criteria. Now, if you don't have success criteria, you need to come up with it. Like, what does success look like for you? And if you meet or exceed those criteria, you're winning, period. Doesn't matter what anyone else does. That's how I look at it.
There's a lot of truth there. I think there's a balance here. I think the balance is, so I just speaking from my own personal journey, I've been incredibly inspired by seeing what other people have done. And that by some level is comparison to where I'm at. And I think ultimately it's the impression that you get out of it. It's not that I'm less than because they're doing that. It's that I know I could do better. And so that inspiration. So I think that's a positive thing in the sense of looking at somebody, you're one of these people, Nick, just to be honest with you, like your dedication and your discipline in learning things is something that inspires me. I wish I had that. That doesn't mean I'm less than, right? Like it just means that is a trait that is positive that I'd like to emulate. That is something that is a goal worth aspiring to. And so looking at others for things like that, I think is a positive thing because I think there's a lot of great examples out of there and getting inspiration from other people's accomplishments is positive. So one of the reasons why Network Collective exists is because we wanted to expose people who are doing great things so that people can see what is possible. But yeah, I completely agree that this idea of somehow you're less than, there's all kinds of contributing factors in people's stories. Some people are handed more, some people are handed less. Some people have challenges and circumstances that other people, you just can't compare. It's not fair. It's not fair to yourself. Yeah,
that's right. And the way I look at it is like you said, you can take a page from someone else's book, but that doesn't mean their book is better than yours. It just means that one page is better than yours.
Right.
And you can, and that's the thing is when you see something you like in someone, that's all you're seeing. There are a lot of things about me and everyone else that are probably best left unsaid because they're not terribly.
Yeah, everyone presents. I mean, this is the social media effect, right? Everyone presents only the positive impact of the things that they do. No one shares the super negative stuff, or at least most people don't.
Yeah,
and so you get a very, very biased picture, an impression of what the actual person is.
Exactly.
There's a lot of truth in that. So Nick, thanks for coming on. I do appreciate you taking the time. As Nick stated earlier, he's been doing a lot of work. Pluralsight, other places, you should definitely go check that stuff out. His content is fantastic. And so if you have subscriptions at Pluralsight, I think if you're on Safari Books Online, there's some content that you can get. There's some webinars and live lessons and things that he does. Of course, there's all the episodes he's done with us. So you can go back and find our app. You can just search on Network Collective, thenetworkcollective.com for Nick Russo. You'll find all the protocol deep dives and things that he's done. And I think it's it for today's episode. I mean, if you enjoyed this, keep an eye on the space for more like it, as well as a few new twists to what we're doing here with Network Collective Short Take. You can find any of our past episodes at thenetworkcollective.com, iTunes, Google Play, Spotify, all the regular podcast places. You can find videos on Vimeo or YouTube. Links to both of those are on the Network Collective website, or you can just search for us there on those sites. So if you watched and listened, thanks so much for being a listener to Network Collective, and we will see you next time.